$4 trillion a day changes hands in foreign currency trading, a third of it in London. On the trading floors, one thing has at least been certain: the position of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But the giant crisis that began last year is making giant changes. This week, the dollar fell to a 14-month low against other currencies, reversing the spike that began last year when the financial crisis made everybody rush to buy dollars.
When you get a bit of worry, concern, sentiment that's negative, it feeds on itself. And we saw that a year ago in equity markets. You just need one catalyst. In this instance, it was Lehman Brothers. And that fed through, and there was a catastrophic effect across the whole of the equity market. That is now happening to the dollar. Sentiment is so dollar negative right now that the frenzy is causing further weakness.
At one level, the dollar is falling because investors are simply chilling out, taking their money out of the safe haven and putting it back where it was before. But that's not the whole story, because now you've got the rising economic powers in the world openly agitating for a new world currency. At the April G20 summit in London, Chinese President Hu Jintao placed on the agenda the idea of using loans from the IMF as the nucleus for a new currency. This month, the veteran Middle East watcher Robert Fisk revealed secret meetings had taken place between Russia, China and the Gulf monarchies on a plan to stop pricing oil in dollars. Meanwhile, China is already finding ways to get around the dollar as a medium of exchange.
China is a massively growing economy, and it has a huge demand for raw materials. So which are of course, they are denominated in US dollars. So to sidestep that issue, it's actually trying to buy some of the producers itself. It's had negotiations down in Latin America, it's had negotiations in Nigeria for oil producers. So therefore it would avoid, on a transactional basis, having to settle in the US dollars. These companies would be owned by China, and China would be the destination for these products.
To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies.
In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the world agreed to fix exchange rates against the value of the dollar, pegged to gold.
Over a period of weeks, finally culminating in the last 2 days, have reached agreement on the realignment of exchange rates is indeed the most significant event that has occurred in world financial history.
In 1971, Richard Nixon ripped up that arrangement, and since then, currencies have floated freely and currency trading has become the biggest industry on earth, many times larger than GDP. Last year's financial crisis was solved by states taking the pain away from banks, and that in turn has pushed much of the tension in the world economy into the relationship between states, their economic models and currencies. And the problem is, we don't quite know how it ends. There's a catch-22. The exporting countries hold their foreign exchange reserves as trillions of dollars, so if they ever did pull the plug on the dollar, their own reserves would be worthless.
Historically, the dollar question has arisen several times, and it hasn't capitulated. Let's face it, there are still trillions and trillions worth of reserves, particularly Asian reserves, held in dollars, and for them to suddenly switch, incur a huge loss on those reserves and switch into another currency would be almost impossible, nigh on impossible. So it's very unlikely to happen.
On the trading floors, you can feel the tectonic forces moving, the dollar weakening, but no real contender to replace it. In that, foreign exchange just mirrors geopolitics. It moves slowly, but the direction is clear.
Paul Mason. I'm joined now by the economist Irwin Stelzer of the Hudson Institute, who's also a columnist for the Sunday Times, and Linda Yueh from Oxford University. Do you think the dollar's days are numbered as the global reserve currency?
Probably, but not for some time yet. I think what a reserve currency is a currency that other countries draw on for not just trade and investment with your country, but as a store of value, as a way of hedging against movements in their own external positions. So what it tends to do is to mirror the strength of the economies in the world. So the British pound used to be the reserve currency in the 19th century, and then the ascendancy of America meant people used the dollar as a store of value. So as as the economic might shifts towards emerging economies, particularly in Asia, I think we are going to see a gradual movement away from the dollar as the only reserve currency.
Oh, you're going to go the way of the British pound. Poor you.
No, I don't think that's going to happen to us. As Lawrence of Arabia said, nothing is written. This is a function of policy. The Obama administration wants a weak dollar.
Well, it says the opposite, though, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, but he says the opposite about a lot of things that he then does. That's his hallmark. There's no question that the administration wants a weak dollar. They want a weak dollar because they want to create jobs, as they see it, by creating more exports and having less imports. That's perfectly clear. Anybody who says anything, Larry Summers says no, and so on. So it suits them. Now, the question is, will they be able to stabilize the dollar when they want to? And my opinion is they will not, because they're not prepared to stop spending. We have these huge deficits. The Chinese are very nervous that the money they're going to pay, that they're going to get paid back is going to be cheap dollars.
But doesn't that point up, sorry to interrupt, Irwin, but doesn't that point up Linda's point, which is that it will take a long time, but the tide is turning against the American economy and therefore the dollar?
Two things. It will depend on the strength of the American economy, as Linda says, the relative strength of the American economy. And the American economy still is a great beast compared to most economies in the world. And second of all, I think you have to keep in mind that the American economy, and by the way, I agree with Linda, there's no way the dollar will remain as dominant as it is, but America still has the rule of law. America still is a safe haven for people's money. So it will take a long time, and there will be an ebbing away from the dollar to other kinds of arrangements. I think that's true.
What does China really want in this? Because, you know, if China does want the dollar to be replaced as a global reserve currency or to be a slightly more complicated system, given that the money that China is owed is in dollars, this might be seen to be against China's immediate interests, isn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. China kind of wants it both ways at the moment. They want to talk about shifting away to a wider basket of reserve currencies because they are very worried about the trillions of dollars being added to American debt, the intent of possibly inflating away all of the debt that they're accumulating, weakening the dollar. But they do not want their $2 trillion worth of foreign exchange holdings, the majority of which is in dollars, to lose value. So what the Chinese want is a very gradual move towards something like the special drawing rights in the IMF, which is a basket of currencies which could be drawn on for international transactions.
Do you agree with that?
I agree with that in part, but I think your problem is you're talking to two economists.
Yeah,
the Chinese want something else. They wanted Obama not to receive the Dalai Lama on this visit. They got that, right? They want less talk about human rights in China. They got that. So I think this is a broad economic and geopolitical game for world power. So the Chinese are conflicted. On the one hand, they would like to see the dollar less powerful. On the other hand, they're sitting on a couple of $1 trillion worth, and they really don't want those to go down in value.
Are there any other, is the euro a credible alternative? Would it make any difference, a great difference, if, for instance, we bought oil in euros or in some other currency other than dollars?
It would make a lot of difference to the Americans. Right. It probably wouldn't make that. It would actually probably add to global stability. Now, the euro, since its inception a decade ago, has become much more important as a reserve currency. Although it only accounts for probably about a quarter of world reserve holdings, it has grown that share very quickly in the past decade.
Compared to what for the dollar, 45% or thereabouts?
The dollar actually is about 2/3, or higher, slightly higher even. So other currencies play a very, very small role. The problem at the moment with the euro is that if you look at the amount of banking sector bailout in the eurozone and the depth of the recession, one of the reasons you want to hold a currency as a reserve currency is that it has a stable value. So if there's any hint that the Europeans are going to go the same way as the Americans and possibly weaken the currency, then there's no chance. But the reason why the dollar has hung on for so long is frankly because there is no credible alternative.
But do you see it? I mean, are historians going to write about this moment the way they wrote about, 1945, 1946? Is this a big deal, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the dollar right now is about where it was 2 years ago. We are afflicted with 24-hour news television, so that every few pennies gets reported. I think the dollar is drifting down in value. It will continue to do so as long as American fiscal policy stays as loose and so we swim in red ink. That can be changed.
We haven't even mentioned healthcare, but we haven't got time for that.
That's just $1 trillion.
Just $1 trillion. That's loose change. But in terms of historical shift, that is how you see it, is it, broadly?
I do see it. I think the 21st century is going to be characterized by many nations having an economic might, and not just the United States, which has been exceptional as a superpower economically and otherwise since the end of the Cold War. But I think the shift will be slow, because remember, we're talking about making another currency credible from a developing world. China, India, Brazil, Russia they do not have the depth in their currency markets to have their currencies be used in this way. The Chinese renminbi isn't even tradable. Right. So it's going to be years to come before we see this change.
Work in progress. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.